Here. Okay, Dennis Young here, part two of the amazing Mike Howlett, producer, member of Bassist of Gong. And if you missed part one, I'm gonna have it up right after this. And Mike, thank you for coming back.
No, well, good. I'm glad you wanted to carry on. We
Of
kind of
course.
there's still my music life, which is, I guess, what you're mostly about. But as
Yeah,
you
well,
as you
I
see,
never,
I had a substantial follow-up career,
I
which
know.
which
And
was producing. Yes,
so let's start off. How did you get into producing? Because you produced all these unbelievable bands in the 80s, you know.
yeah. Well, look, I'd been in bands since, I think I mentioned last time, but since I was like 12, I think my first band, with kids mates at school. And then by 15, I got invited to join a bigger band at school that used to play. And I was living in Sydney at that time. And then the North Shore of Sydney is just like beach after beach after beach, up
Mm,
20 miles up the shoreline above Sydney. And they've all got, schools, high schools that all
mm.
have dances. And we used to do every weekend, we'd be doing playing at these dances because we played top 40. We were a good band, we had good musicians, and we just did, the pops of the songs of the day. But which is I think was a great sort of training anyway, because you kind of absorb the structure,
Mm.
get to see how a good pop song works. And it was a great period, the 60s. You think of all those great bands like, Cream having
Oh,
pop hits,
yeah. Great
uh,
period.
at the Animals, and I mean, just all of them, apart from the Beatles and the Stones, who were amazing anyway. But yeah, so it was great to be playing all that stuff. But I just, why did I get into that?
So,
I don't know. Anyway,
so,
so I've been bands. That's the point, was that I've been in bands since then. I became a professional at 18, and then by 20, I'm 26, and I've been in bands since I was 12, and trying to get a deal for that Sting and Andy and Stewart. That was real hard work, and the record companies weren't interested. So I said all right, and then I've been doing one of the last gigs, I think, with the band, and Andy was moaning about there's only £5, when
mm,
Stewart thought I was trying to steal Sting, and I just thought, I'm just fed up with bands. Band,
yeah,
you get too close to people, and
it
then you
does. You're right.
personal. And I thought I'd like to be a producer. I don't know why. I had no knowledge about more than playing. I made a few albums, obviously,
I,
but
I
at
would say
that
it's
time,
an impressive list. I mean, I'm looking down here: Martha and the
quite.
Muffins, Thompson Twins, Tears for Fears, Gang of Four, Flock of
Orchest-
Seagulls. Wow, and it keeps
yeah,
going.
orchestral maneuvers in the dark. They
Right,
say
they were great.
they spur me a lot, man. Now, what I the thing is that I've realized I'm very fortunate because I was very good looking in those days. I didn't think I was, but I look back and I go, oh, no wonder I had the girls
Mm,
me. But I always had lovely girlfriends who were very helpful. I'd heard about the girlfriend who got me into Gong, but by the
mm.
time I'd started living with this girl, Carol Wilson, who was the one who'd signed Sting, right? She was the one who got
Oh, okay.
we went up and saw them playing. And thing is that she was the manager of the Virgin Music Publishing Company. The other half of
Right,
Virgin was like the record company, but then the music
right.
company signed the writing, and so they signed Sting. They got all his writing. The label was A&M, but over here. But anyway, so she earned millions for Branson, and that is another story we can go into if you like. But
Sure.
so I'm already now. I'm living with the manager of the publishing company, and she was giving me little bits and pieces to do, like there's a band she's interested in. They got 20 songs, go and record everything in this 8-track in 2 days. So I get in the studio with the band, and I'm not
Oh,
wasn't an engineer, but so we just got to get them all down. So I just get the guys to get in there, get set up, be happy, play, and come out with 20 songs. But so that was good. And then see, so I'm inside the fold there, and I was, I told him in the last one, I know, in Simon Draper, Richard Harrison's cousin who was running the label. He was the real music kind of guy who liked all those interesting bands. Richard, was a marketing genius, but not really that good on music. But nonetheless, so I'm inside, the fold there, and so Simon again, whenever he's got something, he sort of oh, that's right. They wanted to do, that live, etc. They had a whole bunch of stuff lying around, tapes and recordings and outtakes and live things, and sort of wanted me to mix it and put it together. So I went and spent, a week up at the Manor, mixing all this stuff from 16 track and 24 track, some of it, and 8 tracks, some of it, and trying to put together all those things. So I basically mixed that album with a really good engineer. Phil Newell was the house engineer at that time. So, and I learned just about the engineering side, just looking at these guys who were very experienced. But that's the thing about a producer. You don't have to be the guy. I mean, it's like, George Martin, he's not the guy hitting the knobs. He's the guy saying, that's great, or once more with feeling, or it gets a bit dull here. Why don't we throw in some strings on that, or anything, whatever it takes, and working with the team, the engineer. And if you read my PhD, you'll see I've analysed the whole process in detail, and that's what a producer really is. Whether you're also the engineer, whether you're just or also like the vibe merchant, the guy who just makes everybody happy. What's his name, who does the Chili Peppers, who lies on the sofa until something's wrong, and
but you had really an ear for this, because you had to develop the sound, I guess, because there was a certain sound of that 80s period of music.
I think it is through well, I just, what happened, there was actually a band, one of the bands that they asked me to do in that stage where I'm trying to sort of doing all these bits and pieces for Virgin. And I think it might have been Carol. They were a New York band called so it doesn't matter. You'll never have heard of them, but they were like a kind of New York punky sort of band that she persuaded and paid for them to come to London and wanted me to go and do some tracks with them, and they were great. But we were talking about the sound and that we were going for, and I remember the drummer saying to me, he said, I want the snare drum to be fat but cracky, fat, put a crack on it. And I thought, fat but cracky, okay, that's it, and it kind of, I didn't have an opinion about what a good snare drum should be. I just, because like Pierre, who was a brilliant drummer, but he had quite a tight, snappy, kind of more jazz setup for his snare drum. But that fat but cracky, that's great direction. And then a bit of reverb on it, and that's that sound. That is the kind of 80s sound that a lot of people said they think I did it. I mean, at the time, there's also I'm going to go into that for a second. Is that there's a thing that happened that I think was really probably Steve Lillywhite, but it was a combination of things, and everybody claims this. But it was a Peter Gabriel album. Which was, again, I'm your senior, everyone will say, it's the one that had Tony Levin on bass, and it had Jerry Marotta on drums, and it had...
was that Intruder? That song Intruder? I think that had that really big drum sound.
Huge crashing sound.
Yes.
And the thing is that I knew everybody. I'd worked with who was the engineer, producer, was Lillywhite. I knew... from being in a lot of studios and meeting up and having a drink. But Hugh Padgham, he was the engineer.
Hugh Padgham, yes, that's it.
He had been an engineer at an 8-track when I first met him, but he was the engineer. But I've had all of these versions I've either told me or read about, but I believe that Jerry Marotta was the guy, because there's a thing about the SSL, the solid state logic desk, that had come out. The first one was in the Manor, and then they had one in Townhouse, which is this Virgin studio in London, where they tried to reproduce the Manor. Anyway, the SSL desk was the first one to have this a latch-on button for talking to the band or whoever in the live room. So you, instead of holding a button down and talking and
Right.
taking it off, you just latch it on and just don't have to hold the button down. But they also, into the circuit inside the actual desk, they built a really basic, cheap compressor, which was just to ram up the
Didn't know
sound. So
that.
wherever you were in the live room, you could be walking around, but you're talking, and in the control room, you could hear what they were saying because it's got a compressor that's bringing up all the level. And of course, when you're doing the drum sound and you've got this thing, you forget you've left it on, and the snare drum guy hits the snare drum.
Yeah.
It was like explosion. It was like the most powerful exploding sound on the planet. And I know loads of people said, "Oh, I want that sound. I want that sound." And the trouble was you couldn't get into it. It was deep buried in the electronics of the whole big desk, and the console. But what I know what they did there was that they put a DVX compressor over a talk mic and put it in the room, or with the same kind of mic, which was a condenser, so it was up on the roof. But they had that there and put it over the thing, and then Jerry said, "Well, I want to have that. That sounds fantastic," and I think Gabriel was the one who said, "That's great. I want that sound." And then they started using it and trying it out. But the trouble is that the moment you start playing the cymbals, it slushes them everywhere.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that's,
right.
and it was to get the snare right, everything else was just washing everywhere. So Jerry was the one who says, "Look, well, I'll play without hitting the cymbals. I won't hit the hi-hat. I won't hit anything. I just do the snare, the kick, and the toms that happen, right? And then we'll overdub the." And that's how they did that record.
Yeah.
But that's where I believe that whole compressed ambience, and then they gated it too so that you could have it go cut off, and that's a gated ambient sound of the 80s that I used a bit too. But I mean, once they'd done that, I thought it was too signature. It was not my sound. That was another. A lot of people tried to do that.
Were there easy records to do, or were a lot of these bands like you did Gang of Four, Tears for Fear? Were these easy records to do, or was there to produce, or did some take a longer than usual?
Oh, some do and some don't. I mean, and also depends on the track as well. And so, but I mean, let me say, so the first. I mean, I had a bit of a success in Europe with a band called Fisher Z, which sold a couple of 100,000 and went on to do more later. But and they were, initially easy to work with. In the second album, of course, the singer got a bit more difficult.
Yeah.
But I say that because that never happened in anywhere outside of like Belgium and Germany, really, and Holland. But the Master and the Muffins, Echo Beach, was the track that really got me going as a producer.
Okay.
Big hit in the UK and across Europe and Australia and Canada. Not so much in America at that time, but it did grow and such. But what was interesting was that where I really learned a big lesson about production, and I always think, well, it's lucky I was inside the family, because without that, would have been a disaster. So, because I went across to record that in Toronto, and so they got the demo, they liked the thing, they signed the band, and Carol Wilson had signed it too. She's just starting a new label, which was originally we were going to do, but Branson said, "Oh, keep it inside the Virgin fold," and so I stayed outside it just as a contracted producer for the job. But Carol was supposed to have shares in this thing. That's another story. But so I go over to work with this band and I meet them. They're doing a gig in a club. So I go down, I'm listening to the band in the club. I'm thinking, oh, yeah, it's great. They're fun. Sounds really good. I wasn't being very critical. So then we go into the best studio in Toronto. I can't remember its name now, but really big, lovely, top of the range professional studio. And we're getting all the sound up, and then they're running through the track. And I say to the engineer, "You can turn the kick up. I can't hear the kick. Can you turn it up a bit?" And he says, "Listen to this." And he solos the kick, right?
Okay.
And I could hear more of the guide vocal Martha Johnson, who's 10 feet away,
Oh my
I
gosh.
could hear the kick drum. It's like,
Oh,
boom, boom. And she's singing, it's like louder than the kick. And so, and he said, I'm afraid that's it. I mean, that's the trouble. He's just not hitting the kick drum. There's not anything I can do. It's just literally that's a kick. And now, maybe in London or with another band, I would have said, who's the best session guy in town?
yeah.
But this band, like the drummer was the younger brother of Mark Gain, was the lead guitarist who wrote the song and was the leader of the band, and they were all art students.
Oh boy.
There's no way I'm going to get them to go, yeah, let's bring a session guy. It just simply wasn't their ethos. And so I just, I thought, okay, well, we did the session, finished it, and had a thing. But I rang up and I was able to ring up Carol and say, listen, Houston, we have a problem.
Oh,
And
right.
I said, listen, what I need to do, I need to come back and sit in a rehearsal room with these guys for 2 or 3 weeks and go through all the material, the whole album. We were just going to do that one track first of all. I said, I'm going to have to sit and go through all of the songs and get the drum part right. And crazy thing, right? That Pierre Merlin, who graduated top of the year at Strasbourg,
Fantastic drummer. Yes.
brilliant, classically trained, and he told me out of nowhere, years before, he told me how he got his kick drum muscles stronger, right? Because he'd had that problem when he starts to play heavier rock music and so forth. And he said, so I got this. He said, a teacher told him this. He said, you put a house brick on the ground, on the floor. You put your foot on top of the brick. And then by putting down with your heel, you're rocking the whole brick up at the front, right?
Okay.
And he said that is what will give you the muscles in your ankle and your foot that's going to give you the control and the kick. Why he told me, I don't know, years ago, years before.
Jeez.
But I had knowledge. And I said to Tim, the drummer, I said, now listen, I'm going to come back in a month and we're going to go and work through all this material. But while I'm away, I wanted to do this. And believe me, this is a serious exercise. You've got to do this because your kick drum really isn't strong enough. And I didn't want to freak him out. I said, look, you've got to get your muscles up, do this exercise. And he did.
Oh, wow.
But also I came back, and sat in a nice room. The bass player had a basement. He had his own house. He had a music store, so he had some money. And so he had his own, basement with a rehearsal space. So we weren't worried about the clock and the money. We just thought it was a very relaxed atmosphere, really important, I realized over the years. So I can sit in a room with these guys and we just look at the songs and they, play it through. And I'm looking at the drummer and I'm thinking, what's he doing? So many young drummers, they try to play beyond their skill level.
Right.
And so they look, okay, now you're trying to do this clever fill, but it's a bit beyond your level at the moment and you're landing late or you're landing early. It's just a standard classic thing I see with a lot of young musicians. And so I said, what we do here is we're just going to simplify the whole part, right? And you don't do the fills. You're going to overdub the fills, right? So you just have to go boom, boom, da, boom,
Get the beat.
Just don't make me. Timing was okay and he kept it good. And he now had a solid, kick drum. So that was good. And then we, that's how we did it. And then also I realized, let's say that, Echo Beach, if you listen to it, it's got this catchy, the most hooky thing is this guitar.
Right.
And it's the catchiest little thing of the thing. And it's not until I sat in the room and I thought, that's the only time this happens is on the intro. And then the song kicks in and off it goes, and the verses and bridges and then the outro, never again. And I said, that's a waste of a great thing, let's make it come back. So we do the whole intro, we do the verse, then they do a B section. They didn't have a chorus until the very end. So it's an interesting song that way. But it doesn't matter. So they do that, and they do this big build, and normally they go into the second verse. And I said, no. So here we just do a whole breakdown. We do the whole intro again, and you do the riff, but half as long, and
Right.
then into the second verse, and you get the hooky, really hooky thing happening twice. Really important for the psychology of the listener, that you've
Right.
got a
Right.
great, you repeat it. I just knew that, there were no manuals in those days. You just go, what's wrong with it? This could be better if we got that more of that happening. And so that's what we did. And that, to me, those lessons, about structuring, making sure the structure is good, and then being able to just sit down and get the band's confidence as
Right.
well.
That's important.
And so I've become their friend, when we're now going to really, when they went to the Manor Studios, it's really very, exotic. I mean, you're in a country house manor, your own lake, and this beautiful studio. It's like very intimidating for a young musician.
I imagine it is.
I'm their friend, I'm their ally, and I'm, steering them through the process and, structuring it, saying, okay, and this is the list of things, put a list up saying, okay, this song we got to do the sax solo, and we got to do the tambourine. What else do you want on it? Oh, you got claps. Okay, we'll do the claps. This is all in the list here. So, and then get all the backing track, and you go through and work through the list, the guitar solo here, all the things that need to be doing, and everyone can see where we are, and they understand that. And it's about managing the project, being in charge, and keeping the vibe good, and keeping everyone focused, and also not hanging around if they want to just chat. There's lots of room there. You could go off to the billiard room and watch the TV room.
Yeah, time is money, right? In the
It's
studio,
about
right?
focus,
Time is
yeah.
money.
And also in that room, you don't want to be, being distracted with all sorts of stories or whatever, and people having a laugh. That happened to me as well when I sang on Shamal, that album. I was the lead vocalist because no one else wanted singing.
Right.
Anyway, eventually we split up and I left Gone. But that was the lovely thing. I learned that from Nick Mason, right, from the Pink Floyd drummer. And Nick is the producer of that album.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Shamal. Yeah, check it out. And so I go out to do the vocal, and I've never been the lead singer, and we do the first take through of the song, and then you finish and it stops, and then the talk button comes down, and you can hear laughter and a party going on.
Oh, wow.
And it was the most, debilitating experience, because you're there, you're so naked in the studio, you've poured out your heart, and I don't have the confidence of the experience either, and so I'm really like nervous. And then the first thing I hear is his laughter, and Nick absolutely in a second got it. He just held the button down and said, "Shut the fuck up! You can't listen. We're just doing some real music here. Go away, get out of here, and let me hear that." Because they know that it wasn't. They're not laughing at me. They're just not listening. They're not paying attention. They're just having a laugh in the back of the studio. So great lesson, just to know that, and also to know that you're scared shitless out there. I'm playing the bass. Look, I'm 100%. I've done loads of recordings and I've done sessions there, but singing at that point, especially, I was so nervous and vulnerable. I just realized that always when I'm doing a vocal, I've just got my finger there. I'm keeping the constant communication with the artist, because they really, even look, I did an album with Joan Armour Trading, who is a wonderful.
I love her. She's got a great voice.
Been doing legendary albums since early 70s, where I just couldn't believe it. I just loved her so much. And she was so nervous. She was still 15 years later of making these great albums, she's nervous as hell, and she really needed that. And when we built a kind of a room in the live room out of the gobos with blankets, because I'd heard that Brian Ferry had done that. One of the studio I worked in, he'd been doing some Roxy Music stuff there, and they said, what he does is he makes this kind of room covered in blankets so that no one can see him, and he's got
Really? Oh,
candles in there, and it's all very
interesting.
intimate and private. And I told Joan about it. She said, "Oh, I like that. Can I do
Yeah.
that?" Yes, and we built a room. She loved it, So this is that people don't understand it. I mean, because people think, oh, they know what they're doing. They've been doing that so many times like that. But you understand. You learn these things from your own, mistakes. Really, I survived a lot of mistakes.
Well, sometimes mistakes are good though, in
That's right.
records.
Yeah, because
I
I
think
know. Yeah.
now I want to ask you about A Flock of Seagulls. Now you had a Grammy for that song DNA. Were you
Yeah.
surprised that you got a Grammy, even nomination?
Well, I didn't really know what it meant, at the time. Even when my manager told me I got a Grammy, I said, "Oh, yeah, oh, good. What's that?" Well, I knew
Yeah.
that it was an award or something. I didn't realize how big it was, really important. But I do know, interesting at the time that you know Iran was a big hit, in
Yeah.
America, and it was really up there in the top five. And at the time, Duran Duran was the other big English band. It was like neck and neck with Flock of Seagulls, and my manager told me, he said, "Look, at the moment where it's going is that there's a lot of pressure for Duran Duran, and we're pushing hard for Flock of Seagulls, and it's sort of neck and neck." Eventually, they decided Duran Duran, I think, because they'd had
Mm,
a couple of hits anyway by that time, and this was their only first hit, but they said, okay, well, we'll give them the rock instrumental because we want to give them a Grammy, but not the best pops record one, which was that's something. So I got the Grammy. I didn't get the actual little statue though. What I've got, I don't know if you can. Oh yeah, you can see it now.
right.
I point with my finger up on there's a between that bookcase and the shelves
Okay.
that framed certificate, and if you
Okay.
look close,
Okay.
it actually is the official Recording Association of America. It's called awarded a Grammy to Mike Howlett for DNA Best Rock Instrumental. So, but the band gets to keep the thing, but we all got the Grammy for that track, and so it's how it goes with that. So it's not a specific producer one; it's just for the track. And that
There.
track, interestingly, it's very instrumental on the album, but how it went down, they were an interesting band to record because they had done a ton of gigs, a lot of gigs, and so they could play. They were all, even though and the drummer, although he was very basic, he taught himself to be simple. And it's a
Mm,
funny thing you'll find if you actually analyze the drums. It's again another funny little thing about drummers. I didn't notice it as the engineer. I think Mike Shipley who pointed this out to me, but he said if you look at him, he can't hit the hi-hat and the snare at the same time, and he can't hit the snare, the hi-hat, and the kick at the same time. So if you listen to what he's playing, he's
okay.
going boom boom cack, but he's putting the hi-hat in between, so it's boom back boom back boom back,
Yeah.
and you don't notice it because it's part of it. Normally, if it's hitting the snare and the hat, or the kick and the hat, it's part of the sound of it, right? But it actually gives a funny, weird loping to all their songs. And so, if you listen closely,
I
you'll
got to
hear.
listen to that. That's a strange rhythm. Yeah.
It is a funny little feeling at that.
Yeah.
You don't notice it because it does work, and it's because they're electronic as well as other. They had this great. The guitarist was a really good guitar player. He really could play. If you listen to Iran, and he's doing really brilliant solos, and he's doing the ga. He's got his
Yeah.
chorus. So he made that work. And such this track DNA. It is a pure rock instrumental, so it's just mainly the guitar plays its whole thing. And the way we did it, we had it all set up. We did it very live, so they're doing the drums, bass, guitar, and the keys all at once. And
Mm,
then then we immediately I did with almost everything at the time. I just immediately double tracked the guitar, right? Just
Okay.
do the whole track. We got the backing track. We got everything right, and then straight away double track the guitar because it was a sound that I knew would really work. Double tracking guitar was always, you look at heavy rock bands, all do that's what you do. Not that big power, you double
Yeah.
track it, triple it sometimes. So we do that. We double tracked it, and then the one thing was that does, and that was the kind of part of the track was that he speaks into the pickup on the guitar, which is, and his guitar was microphonic, and he goes DNA, and it goes through his guitar and through his
Oh,
chorus.
through his guitar. Wow.
So it's got all the sound of the guitar amp and the chorus effect and the reverb of the delay. And that, if you listen to this track, check it out, because that's just literally speaking into the pickup. Right. So the point is that we do this whole thing, we double track the guitar, he does the voice thing, and then we put the tape away. We don't go back to that track until the mix.
Okay.
Listen, but if you go to like Iran, and that track that I knew, and my manager, brilliant guy, and he made me sure I knew. He said, "That's the hit, right? This is the hit. Whatever else happens on this album, that's got to be it. You've got to get that right." And the trouble was, we did it great backing track. They really could play really well. The arrangement, they had a sound that was interesting. We worked right, and then we go and we do the vocal, and just not a good singer. So I do what I do with a vocal, even with the best vocalist. Me and Joe and I are trading the same. I'll take 5 takes, right? And I'll get very, very patient. And I'll spend 8 hours if necessary, right? I'll go through line by line. I pick the line. I pick half the line. I pick a word from that take and slot it into the take. All analog, we're all talking.
Yeah, that's hard.
24 track, and I make up a composite track out of all the best bits, right? So I do that, and I play it, and I take a mix at home, and I go back, and after all that, you can't be objective. So I home, I stick the cassette on in the morning in my house. I listen, I go, it doesn't cut it, just not good enough. So go back to the studio, we go in and say, okay, look, it's not. I think we need to get it better. It's not good enough. I don't know if I probably wouldn't have said not good enough. I would have just said, I think we can get it better. Okay. And so we do it again, right? And then I go, and I get another 4 or 5 takes, and I look at them, and then I do what I start to do is I start to double track them, and take the ones that work well with each other, and then I build up this double track thing until I've got kind of, and then I think I say, okay, well, it's kind of better. Then I take it home the next day, and I'm listening, and I'm going, it doesn't work. There's something that's hard to explain, but it's not being in tune. It's not about anything except that it fucking works. It's like Bob Dylan. You don't go, oh, he's a bit flat there, a bit sharp on that note. It doesn't matter. You don't care. Jimi Hendrix, technically not a brilliant singer. Amazing, because it just works, right? Why does it work? It works. I don't know. So I've got them. It's not working. And this is the key killer. This track's got to work. This track doesn't work. The whole project's work. We know that. This is a single, and it's going to work, and it's got to work. And I just did this. Honestly, I counted it up. I think I did 100 takes, and I made composites of each time. And then I ended up with like 5 composites, and then I made composite of the composite, right? And so I've now got, and then I've got another.
Gosh.
Well, finally, I get this point. So I've got this track. It's almost good enough, but the texture's just not right. And then I just try to sing that. I think I'd already done this with Orchestral in the Dark, but Paul Humphreys is not the lead singer mostly. He sang on a song called Souvenir, in a beautiful soft voice, but it just wasn't enough character. And I realized that, and I figured out that with his one, it was all easy. They were all good takes, but none of them had enough texture. And so you put the main one up, and then underneath I put 4 double tracking but they're sunk about 5 dB below the main one.
Okay.
And it doesn't sound like a double track. It just sounds like the voice texture is thicker. It's better, and it makes it work. So I did that with, but these are all composites anyway, and they're all actually double track bounce things. So how are the actual things? So I did that. I picked the best one, and I bring up the other four. And when you listen to that thing, you'll think it's almost like a robot singing, but that's part of its charm. It
Right,
works.
right, of course.
And it works by the fact of a huge, astonishing amount of effort. And I deserve, that. That was hard work, I tell you. It's a shame because it really, anyway.
That is something. Now,
Yeah.
what about I really love the band Gang of Four. You did a record with them, right?
Yeah, no, that was a lot of fun.
I love those guys. They were great.
They were great guys, I mean, it's very sad that two of them are dead, actually. Now we've only got Andy, what's this King? Is it John King and Andy, well, guitarist, Gang of Four. You'll have to look him up and dub it in.
Yeah.
We'll come back to me in a second. Andy Gill, Gill. Now he was the real kind of creative brain genius behind the band.
Okay.
I mean, King is a really, really good front man and a very good energy and a great performer.
Yes.
He's not a really good singer, but he's got a lot of character. But Andy is the one who's doing this. Really, he's writing most of the material. He's the creative drive behind the band. He's a very, very intelligent, lovely guy. And Hugo Burnham, the drummer, and still a friend. He actually lives in, I think, in Massachusetts. He teaches at a music school up there.
Oh, okay.
A professor of music, and he's been doing that for a long time, at least 20 years. But yeah, so Hugo ended up going into academia, and funnily enough, they came through Brisbane in about 2000. I went out to Brisbane 2009. I did 5 years as a head of music at a university in Brisbane.
Right.
And Gang of Four came through, and this time it was just Andy and John.
Okay.
Hugo wasn't with them. I don't know why, he's just teaching now. And they had a couple of young guys, drums and bass. They were good, real good players. And Andy was still playing great, and still alive at that.
Yeah. He had just a great guitar sound. I mean, it's so clean
really,
and precise.
Beautiful. Yeah. No, he was a great guy, and it was a fun album too. And that song that became a kind of club hit in America is "I Love a Man in a Uniform."
Oh yeah, great song.
And to have a listen to, because we had this sort of desk. That studio was called Ridge Farm. It's a residential down in this countryside, just about 20 miles south of London. Very comfortable, nice place to work, and they had a solid state Logic desk. And I was thinking that would be really good to have that exploding SSL snare through the listen mic on that track. I don't know why, I just thought it would have a man in a uniform. Big snare drum. And I said to we talked to the maintenance engineer, because I asked the engineer. He said, look, I don't know how to get to it. We'll ask the tech engineer and see what he says. And he said he had looked it up on the circuit diagrams, and he said, look, it's not it's in the circuit, printed on the circuit board, but I could make an exact copy of it in a box, right, in a separate little box. And it cost like £10. I mean, nothing, just to make this little thing. Because he said it's just a little chip, basically, op amp, as they call them. It's just a basic, very, very basic thing. And it's a compressor. It's got, couple of resistors, a couple of condensers, a capacitor,
Right.
and
That's
the
pretty neat.
battery power supply, because it's running just off the rail in the desk, so it's not even, you don't even need a transformer, you can use a battery. So he made me this box, and you plug it in, and and it's balanced, so you could take it off the desk. And we did exactly that. And so we recorded it with this singing and did overdubs and made it, and then when we mixed it, put it back through it again, and so the whole thing is like
Oh,
super hyper massively compressed snare drum. I love that. It was
yeah, it's a great song.
yeah. I mean, it was good fun making that album with those guys. I felt frustrated with it because they'd done the demos for it, and they'd used a guy who was a mate of theirs who was actually a producer and engineer in a small kind of demo studio in London, and he played the bass on all the demos. But then they got this Sarah Lee, I think her name is.
Oh, was she from Public Image? Sarah Lee, or is that
Yeah,
somebody different? Yeah.
I think it was her.
Pill,
Yeah.
right?
Huh?
Was she from the band Pill at the time?
Yeah, Pill. I think so. I'm not sure. Look her up there. I think it's
Okay.
anyway, look, the thing is, she was okay, but this guy played great bass. It was really good. I mean, I'm a connoisseur of the bass. I like her, and I did say to them, can we not use him? And he said, "Oh no, she's in the band, and that she's okay." And she was okay. She did okay, And I worked the parts, and I made sure that the takes were good, but he just had it, he had a really nice sting. And I just know that would have been a better album. But again, you're not dealing with guys who want to be, they don't want to be S Club 7 or
Right.
That's an old band now. And whatever the new latest boy band is, Boyzone, they don't want to be any of those things. They want to be totally cool and groovy, and they do not want, session people coming in. They are the real thing. And communists and the revolution and all that. But they were such nice guys. We had a lot of fun making that as well. So that was good.
They
so
were.
when you say
Go
like,
ahead.
but, no, I say reversing. So yes, came back because let's just show the difference of things. That I mean, they were, again, I got on really well with everybody. I'm still very good friends with. Well, there were two Marthas in Master and the Muffins. Martha Johnson, who was the singer, and Martha Ladley, who played the keys. And she was the cute one, I would say. She was.
Yeah.
But she became really good friends and still is. And tragically, she actually, I'm not sure how it doesn't matter if you'll see this, but she's got a thing called Lewy body disease, and it's like Parkinson's, but it's different in some way. I'm not sure how, but it's all about neurons in the brain getting clogged up and slowing down. So she's been diagnosed with this now. She's losing the control of her body. And
sorry to hear that.
very hard, sort of tragic, slow death that she's going through. It's that we see her a lot. She came and stayed here about a week ago with her partner and husband now, Dan Solomon, who's a great artist who actually was he was one of the teachers at that art school back in the 70s and 80s. Anyway, she went back and got married to him in the end. But yeah, he's over here. They live here now in the country. Very sad. But what I wanted to say, the story was about the sax solo, because when we did that version that had to be scrapped with the weak kick drum,
right?
The one that had the thing of that was great was it had this gorgeous sax solo. It was just heaven, he just played it. He went out and did the sax solo, a beautiful, soaring, fabulous solo, right? Anyway, so we're back in England. We re-recorded the whole thing. We got the record the whole album. We're going. And the whole track is all sounding really good. And now it's time for the sax solo. So out he goes, Andy Haas, his name was. And so he goes out to do the sax solo. And then we come up to it, and here he goes. Basically, it's like screeching, squawking.
No.
On Copeland when he was into his heavy avant-garde, the atonal screeching.
Oh
And
boy.
we just cracked up. We thought, he's having a laugh, so he finished the take and said, very, very funny, Andy. That's great. Okay, let's do it now. So that was it. So what do you mean that's it? So
Oh
no,
my
seriously,
gosh.
that was it. And I realized he was serious. And I knew, so I got him in to the control room. And I sat down and said, so why, this is really not appropriate. It's just like, the song has the way we did it and the demo and the way we did it in Toronto, it's got this beautiful soaring melodic solo that just takes the song out into the outro, and it's just
Right.
fabulous.
Yeah.
Said, this is just as good. I said, no, I don't know, it's not. It's just like really screeching and abrasive, and it's not even. I said, no, I think it's beautiful.
Oh, that's something. So
No,
how
I've
did
met a lot of these people since, and when I had to go in the uni, the avant-gardists will tell you that is just as beautiful, and it's not. Anyway, look, what happened was that every day I set a time, like 4 in the afternoon. We come in, I say, okay, let's have another go at the solo, Andy. And he goes out and he's screech, squawk, squawk, and then have a half an hour of philosophical discussions about what isn't music and appropriate music, or and why that works there, but it's not right here. And and he did it there, so why did you? And the whole band were with me, but they, it's just relentless. But basically, over about 10 days, I ground him down, and he even finally went out and played the solo note for note that he played in Toronto,
okay.
but it didn't feel good. I said, I don't want the notes, Andy. I want the feeling. That's not,
Right.
that's just the notes, This is you going, here's the notes. All right, ha ha, take that, you fucker. And I said, it's not, I don't want the notes. I want what you did in Toronto. You've
Right.
made it fly. And he finally fucking did. It's a beautiful solo. I still think the one in Toronto, but you listen and check that beautiful solo.
I got to check that out. Yeah.
Tell you, I mean, that's like, so anyway, so I do that and it's a hit. And then I get to do first track with Crystal News in the Dark. And this is going to be awkward because they'd already made this album themselves in their own home studio up in Liverpool where they live. And they were really proud that they made it themselves. It was very kind of garage, very home. I know quite a lot of people, not a lot, but I know a few people who tell me, no, that one is authentic. You just made it all smooth and gooey. And I said, yeah, right, but mine was the hit,
I like that.
And I do, I don't do lecturing anymore, but I do have this one lecture I always try to do with my production students, and I play them, trying to explain the difference what a producer does. And I play them the air version, which sounds tinny and has a charm, but it's kind of very dinky. And then you hear my version, which is the same song and the same arrangement, even actually, or the same structure. And I'd had to do a sell on these guys, and Carol Wilson had signed them to Virgin, and she wanted me to produce them, and she said, because this song, the album is just too sort of thin and not really going to do it. And this song she thought could be a hit. So I go in to meet them in a room in the office, and I said, my pitch was that I think it's all great, but I think it could sound like bigger and fatter and richer, like deeper, more bass and more highs, it could be like just the whole thing, but big, bigger and richer. And that somehow or other they went, all right then, but we went in, and so we went in and we did this. It was one of those sort of ended up like 36 hours non-stop the second day. And we did it exactly how they done it.
Right.
But as we were laying down all the parts, but I was doing it in a really nice studio with a great engineer and making all the sounds so tougher and thicker, and synths. They had this little synth that they, called microprocessor, cheap at the time, but it had a dinky sound, but we fattened it, we compressed it and EQ and that, and lovely engineer working with me. But all the way through, I started to hear a bass part that wasn't there. Andy was playing a bass and he was just sort of going ding 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 ding, you know, and it was just nothing there. It was just like that. It was just okay, but it didn't really do it. And I said, so when we pretty much got the whole song arranged and finished and recorded, you know, and I said, I did two brilliant things on that. I was so pleased with, right? Because I said, okay, I had this idea, this riff, you know, you just get an idea, a riff. I said, try this, okay? Just everything that's there, we're not taking another note, but I think we need another bass that's an octave lower, right down in the low G, which key of the song, right? And so it's going so dum, 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 dum. There's a synth, right? It's doing this. And
Right. Okay.
And the other bass thing, ding, 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 dum, 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 dum. So I said, okay, now what we want you to do is this, right? Dum, dum, boom, 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 ding, dum, dum, boom, 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 boom,
Yeah, that sounds better.
boom, 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 you know, boom, 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 boom. And so this really big fat thing that's going like almost like a reggae counter to it. And Andy was just dancing around in the studio going, oh, I can't believe it. It's just amazing. Because it did. It was just one of those little ideas that actually transforms it into
what a difference.
This monster thing.
Ah.
And it really, really worked. And he loved that. And also I did the other thing. It's going to take a little bit of explaining. I hope it's not too boring. And I was so proud of this. It's again why I used this for my lecture was that the intro. Now, one thing I learned is the intro is really important on a pop record. Radio stations, they want you to suck them in and hit them in the first 30 seconds, right? They're not going to sit around waiting 5 minutes for the
right.
And they want in 20 seconds, 30 seconds, max, you know, you got to get them in. And the song started with just this, you know, quite nice dum 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 dum. So the synthesizer that's jumping up boxes like that, and then there's a keyboard that goes and I've got an echo so it goes a really nice chordal thing. It's fine. And then it was a chuck boom and off we go, you know.
Right.
But I said it's just a bit not really very interesting. Let's try. And my first idea was like, let's try a backwards cymbal, which is always good, you know. So it's going dum, 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 and you know, that's always a good one to suck you in.
Right.
It sounded a bit too just like a cymbal going there. Wasn't really doing it. So then I've had another idea. Thought, okay, we're using analog tape here. Now the first when it goes jumping off starts, there's this the keyboard plays this chord straight away. It's just a sustained string synth holding chord down, right? So I said, what I want you to do is like we're going to turn the tape over and mark it where the drums come in.
Okay.
And I want you to just start holding that chord and until we see where the mark goes on the tape, and we keep it going for another, you know, minute to it. But as you're holding the chord down, I'm going to hit the vary speed on the big 2-inch tape machine.
Okay.
And we've got it set for fast as possible, right? So it's playing at normal speed until it hits that, and then hit the very speed, the tape starts going faster.
Oh, that's neat.
Right. And then you turn the tape back over, and what happens is that the keyboard sound starts from really sub-audio, but so low you can't hear it. So
that's really interesting how that happens. Right.
Landing on the chord. And we thought, that's great, that's interesting.
That's a lot of work to get that right. Wow.
And this is where I think I deserved the Nobel Prize, because right now I'm going to do exactly the same. At this time, I'm going to set the very speed to go as slow as possible. So you're playing the chord, and we pass the mark going backwards, and you hit the very speed, and it goes slower and slower and slower and slower. Turn it over, play it back. This keyboard's going from supersonic.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Put them together, and they're going like dissonant and crazy, and then the back of cymbal and right there. Check it out. That
I got to
is
check that out. That's
is
amazing.
killer. The best start of a single on radio you'll ever hear. I think. I mean, I love it. I just think it's. I'm so proud of it because it worked. It really sucks you in. You don't know what the fuck it is. It's all this strangeness, and yet you've got the consistency of the key, but it holds you in, and then bang, you're off into the song. And I just thought that is a work of art. Yeah.
And what was the song again? What was the song on the record that did that?
Messages.
Messages. Okay.
Messages. And now you get their album, the original first album. I can't remember what it's called. They had a great single called Electricity, but it became too thin. I did try to do a version of it later, but it didn't work as well. But that song, Messages, on their album.
Okay.
And then the single, which is there's a compilation of their best of that came out in the late 90s, sold millions, so it sold several million albums.
Wow.
Things together across Europe and across Australia and New Zealand, around the world. And I still get, this is the crazy thing, is that I actually get more royalties now from those things from the 80s and put together all of them, A Flock of Seagulls and Orchestral Manoeuvres and Human Gang 4 and that I got 20 years ago. And it's all because two things was the fact that the internet massively increases the use of music. And even though everyone complains that, Spotify pays you 0.001p, for every listen. But that's not quite as cruel as it sounds, because if you get like a million Spotify plays, you'll get about $60 to $100, I think is how it works out. Everyone thinks that's crazy, But what I can tell you is back in the 80s, when I knew this, I don't know what the current figures are, I could look them up, but it doesn't matter, because back in the 80s, when you had a record played on Radio 1, which is the national big pop station, BBC Radio 1, it was the biggest station, and in peak time in the afternoon, offices are playing them and factories are in, you get maybe 5 million people listening to one play of that record, and you would get about £300 for 5 million people listening.
That's something.
Right?
Wow.
So what's the difference? You get £50 for 1 million people playing it at different times, so it's not far away. I mean, somebody can tell me how wrong I am, but I've done a lot of looking at this, and I hear a lot of people ranting at me, but I say, listen, think about it. It's just a different way. You're not, one play, 5 million listeners, a million plays, a million, maybe 2 million listeners because you're sitting with friends or something.
Well, plus, plus if the records got in movies or TV shows or.
Oh yeah, I ran. It was on the La La Land, that film recently, Hollywood. They get used. I remember way back in the late 80s, I think. I was on holiday down in the south of France, and so I remember it. And suddenly, my phone goes ping, maybe in the 90s. Yeah, mid-90s. I get a ping, on my phone, and it's my bank sending a message saying, we just put £10,000 into your account.
Wow.
Account, And I thought, oh, well, that's all right.
Yeah.
I'm not complaining.
No.
Was it? And I finally, found out that I ran the Flock of Seagulls track, right?
Yeah.
Grand Theft Auto, steal the car, level 3, steal the car, jump in, turn on the radio. I ran.
That's great. That is great. Well,
I got 10 grand just for the license to use it. The band would have got, 100 grand, but I don't know. And I still get stuff from that kind of thing. And it's weird. It's just mad that I actually get more than I was getting 20 years ago. Not as much as in the 80s, but, it's nice. It's a nice little top up, for all those expensive wines and restaurants I like.
So it's nice that you're on the actual, even though you produce the records, but you're on the publishing, right? Where you still get something from
No, she's not publishing. It's
okay.
This is the thing, is that a record producer has And we
What do they?
managed to change. Right, and that's what the Producers Guild achieved in the UK. Not, you mean you have a record contract, which is almost always only based on physical sales, right?
Got it. Okay.
So maybe downloads there is something that is less, but it's still, downloads, yes, and sales, right? But that's only for the recording. Your contract is about the copyright of the recording, and it's
Got
the
it.
thing in
Okay.
this country is called PPL, phonographic. In America, it's actually been pretty slack with it, but they do it for digital broadcast now. It's changed. But the thing was that they wouldn't pay producers. And we fought for them for years, honestly.
Hmm.
People, and they used to threaten people losing their, never work again, that kind of serious threat from the major labels. And that BPI was talking about, they go, why should we do it? Because the law as it stood, and up to 1995, was that, and it was a deal done back in the 30s, the 1930s, that they said, okay, this featured artist has a claim, and the record company, they own the copyright of the recording. It's not about who wrote the song. It's a whole other law. That's why publishers are separate.
Got it. Okay.
So they are always separate legal contracts and everything. But the title of the copyright of the recording, the broadcast use of it, the phonographic performance license, would go like 30%. I think they decided was maybe a third even was to the artist and the rest to the record company. And that's how it was for years. And then as the record company artists got bigger, they started to fight a bit. And some big artists managed to say, we want 50% of it. Finally, in 1995, a European law, one of the few good things that came out of it,
Right.
in my opinion, out of Europe, was that the UK agreed, everyone agreed that record producers had a right to be considered, because even there's a third category that if you were playing in the orchestra and you're
Right.
a non-featured, non-contracted, just playing the triangle, you got a little piece on it. People who played on the soundtrack or, James Bond, things, they're getting a little bit of money, and it all was going through the musicians union. But record producers, George Martin, you say, well, how much was he involved in, the recording of
Yeah.
yesterday, the most played record, at the time, still probably second or third of all time, nothing, and finally, they changed the rules, and they finally agreed with us, and I was very there in that fight. But it wasn't, it was a bunch of people doing it. We all pushed, and Robert Miller was very big in that fight, but we achieved it. And that's why I'm getting money
That's
now,
great. Wow, that is great. Yeah. And
because
what?
every time
Yeah.
their record's played, we're getting our little piece. We're
Yeah.
featured, same as the featured us, but we are the same as like a solo, soloist who got, contracted soloist. We're not the same as the triangle player. We're getting more than the triangle player. And we had to sort of say we're the performing producer, and bands can still say no, we don't reckon he did contribute to the creativity of the performance if they don't like you. And I thought it might go touch and go, because back to talking about, do the sessions go well? Well, that went great. Everyone loved it, and it was a big hit. And then they got on top of the pops here, the big TV pop show, and like big class sort of thing, but huge. And I remember we had to go and do a dummy session in those days for the musicians, I think, and we're doing it, and I said, "Oh, it's great, isn't it?" And Danny said, "Well, yeah, but I still think our version's better."
Yeah.
So mine's the hit, blah blah. But a couple of months later, he rings me up and says, changed my mind. I think it's the best thing we've done. I want you to do the next album. Right? So we
That
go
is great.
record
Wow.
it. And that had this track, Enola Gay, which was like, it became a huge hit. But see, Enola Gay was just great. It was all there. We were recording a really good studio, the same studio I did the Gang of Four, actually, the Ridge Farm. And it was easy. I mean, the only thing was we didn't like the vocal, wasn't really cutting it. And we went back to that original studio we did the messages at, and they had this gorgeous, like 30s valve Neumann, it called it M49, like
Hmm.
a 45 with this kind of squarish, but not square, but sort of squat one, not the long, slender one, which so that's what looks like a U87.
Oh, I see it. Okay.
No, this one's more squat, but it's also just a large condenser. It's valve. There's a tube microphone, and this one is very old, and it just suits his voice. It just
Hmm.
so we went back and did the vocal again at that studio just for that microphone, and that was great. And the album was a hit, and the song was a hit, and everything was good. And then we came to do a single for the next album, another year later, and this was the one that Paul Humphreys sang, who was the other keyboard player. There's really two guys in orchestral music in the dark. I have a drummer as a session drummer and another keyboard player. But it's those two guys. So anyway, and so Paul had written this song. It was a great song, very beautiful, but Andy couldn't find a bass part for it. And
Hmm.
we were recording it, and I went up to see them in their studio up in Liverpool and replayed it to me, and he said, "Things I don't know what to do. I cannot think of a thing but a bass." And I said, "Well, look, I can't. I think it just wants a very simple bass line. I don't think it needs anything fancy. Right for now, why don't you just do, follow the chords down? So it's just
Yeah, that would work. That works.
for now, because it needs a bit of bass, but it doesn't want anything in the way. But that will give it a nice bit of depth. And we think about it, and then we'll try it for something better." And he goes, "Okay, fine." So we go down to London, and we're recording this thing, and and he plays, and he said, "Oh, it's just too simple. It's not. I can't. I've got to have it. It's not interesting. It's just boring." And I said, "Okay, fine, let's do it. Whatever you like, let's do it." And then I set up over about 4 or 5 days. We recorded this track, and I set up time again, a bit like Andy Haas. I'd say, "Okay, 4 o'clock, and I said, look, I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave the room, go and play snooker,
Yeah.
with Paul, and you do what you want, anything." And I come back in half an hour later, and he's got this very clever kind of jerky talking heads bit, and I'm going, and then he'd go, "No, it's rubbish. No, you're right. It's not better. It's just worse. It doesn't help." So fine. Next day, honestly, every day you
Hmm.
see twitchy and nervous and going,
Oh,
bass, fine, we do all that. That's a session where also like we do the vocal with Paul, and I do another one, and they're all really in tune and really good, but none of them are strong enough.
right.
And they
Yeah.
found the technique of the main vocal, and then not just doubling, having four very similar but sunk beneath, just below the threshold of hearing them. And it gives this voice a beautiful, really work with that song. It just makes it very magical, and that sounds like one voice. It's a very funny little thing. But have a listen to that
Yeah.
souvenir.
I think, we're running out of time, over an hour. Could we do another number three? Is there any chance we could do another we didn't get
uh,
we didn't get into your record label or
yeah,
your
that
it's up
didn't
to
happen.
you. I mean, if you want to talk a little bit about the record label now and or you
Look,
want to
I did learn a big thing about record labels, because I managed to get backing from some guys who were not music people, but they had office space in a warehouse just out from the edge of London, and so it was good to have an office. And they put up some money, and I managed to sell the artists I'd found publishing, got funding out of that. So for a couple of years I had that, and I learned what I learned was distribution. That so we made this CD that was really good, and then we're going to release it. It got 4-star review in the Cube magazine, which is great. They loved it and said it sounded like Nick Drake. And
mm,
wait, with a really great guy who was our contact at our license manager at the distributors. There's a Pinnacle they were called, and they distributed indie labels across the UK, and they were really good. They did a lot of big labels, indie though, not major, because all big majors have their own distribution, right? Anyway,
right.
so
Yeah.
he says, "So okay, when's the release date?" "Okay, so a month before, you're going to have to come and do a presentation to the sales force." I said, what is that?" he said, well, every month we get them all across the UK. They come down to us, and we have a day where all the new releases get played, and they get to talk to see what the story is. And so they want to know what the story is for how you're going to sell it and all that stuff. And I go,
Yeah.
what is that? And
Yeah.
anyway, we managed to get him with we had to pay too, which John Martin, remember John Martin is this really well-known guitarist, folk sort of blues singer who died now as well. But he had a tour. He would get 500 to 1,000, and he'd do 80 dates across the UK and Ireland, and so and we had to pay. He said we have to pay for the advertising, which was £2,500.
Wow.
Various music magazines. But we thought, okay, and then he says, oh, you didn't have to pay to support. I don't approve of that, but you have to buy the ads for the tour. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
And so he said, well, that's the story. And so I learned that I'll go and meet, stand in a room with all these guys and to say, okay, this is the story, this is the song, and we've had these reviews, which is great. And we had a promotion person who set up a tour where they're going to radio tour. So he's going to be down in this town and this town, and he's going to be, when he's supporting John Martin, so he's going to travel around and going to do radio talk and blah blah blah. And I suddenly I went, oh, that's what
Oh man.
record companies do.
Yeah. Oh boy.
You make a record, and until then, I finished the record, and it's mixed, and there's an A&R guy, and he said, here it is, and fuck off, and I'll do a couple of remixes, but no idea what happened. And you wonder sometimes where you think that was a great record, but it just died. And
That's too bad.
You learn that the guy who signed them jumped label, and there's no one there who's going to get any credit if it's a hit. So they don't care. They want their new baby they've signed to get them the promotion money and do the videos and all that. And that's how it was. And I don't doubt it's the same, except it's now there's funding and there's ways that you market yourself, and promotion and marketing is what record companies do. It's not just making the records. We can do that, but I learned that. I learned that hard.
Especially if they're going to promote it and actually do the advertising for you.
That's what I had no idea. I just been a musician and made the records, but you don't understand that actually selling is what half the world does.
Yeah, because now it's a whole different world. Music now, selling, a band trying to do something. So I guess we'll keep going a little longer. You did the studio record you produced for Gong in the year 2000. Did you produce that record?
Well, I kind of did. I mean, the thing is that you can't really produce Gong.
There you go.
So Steve Hillies did the one in 2009, 2032.
Right.
He's got producer credit, and had to his credit. I mean, he did actually. And the thing is, it was Steve's. He took that and mixed it himself. I was not very pleased, but I couldn't do it. I was back. I went off. I finished my parts and went to Australia and became head of the school. So he finished the album, but I was disappointed in the mixes. I thought that, especially the drums, we had a great idea of how to make them kind of more electric. But I still think some good tracks, and it's good. But yeah, that game, with Gong, you're really just negotiating and managing the project. That David will have his complete, vision of things that he wants.
I'm sure. I'm sure. It's hard to tell David Allen, he's in his own world there.
His song, like if it was like Didier's track, then he's not going to be so bothered. But Didier would like to be around and be involved, and so the decisions that took place were negotiated. But I did sort of have the experience to kind of supervise and manage it. It's one of the definitions of what a producer does. So one of them is project manager. That you make it work. You get everybody there at the right time. You fit the things are there and problems are solved and issues are dealt with. But that's most of it's everybody in there is equal. But one thing I'm very pleased we did manage to do is that we managed to get the composing credit shared very fairly, and which we actually did it on the U album. If you look at the credits, it's was actually a 7-way split, I think it turned out. Some people said it should have been 8 or 9 ways, but it was possible to do. But when David was really pissed off at that, because he, well, I wrote most of this, and I wrote it. Yeah, look, that's not how that album was. We all agreed at the start, and what we agreed with this one was that we would work out on each song who should have, you know, how much. And so there were songs that David brought in, and I'd say, well, I reckon that's probably, you know, 40% you, but I think 20% to the drummer. And he said, well, I didn't write anything. I said he wrote the drum part, and that's Chris is a beautiful drummer, Chris Taylor, and played a really special part, and he made that album work in a lot of ways, and it needed his drumming. I wrote the bass riff.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, it's something that I know you must maybe heard about Andy Summers and Every Breath You Take, you know, which is, if you think about it, it's got a very nice little guitar riff, hasn't it?
Yeah.
and Andy, I see every now and every few years we go and have a lunch with him, and he was just ranting a few years ago about Sting. One of the reasons that they hate each other.
Oh boy.
Sting. And he said the thing is that with Every Breath You Take, is that when it applied to quite a few others, if you think about it. So Sting comes in, he's got this song, he goes, chugga, 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 yeah, every breath, okay, nice melody, nice chugging chords. And he says, you know, but can you go and work out a guitar for it? So Andy goes away, and he comes back, he's got this that guitar. You go and listen to that guitar. And so, can I have a piece of the writing? No, I wrote the melody and chords. That's my song. Fuck you, you know.
Oh
anyway,
boy.
So what's his name? Is it Gangster's Paradise or whatever it's called? And they use guess what? They sample that song, right? And there's a huge hit, and there's a lawsuit about it because Sting wrote it, yeah. But guess what? The bit they sample is the guitar riff. They do not sample the melody. They actually don't even sample anything else, the chords.
Oh boy, yeah.
All you hear is the fucking guitar, right?
Yeah.
Can I have some money, please? Fuck you, you know. And I mean, it's like, oh, because poor old Sting is really broke, you know. He can't really afford to pay the rent, and he's got 5 children, you know.
Oh my gosh. Oh, terrible.
You know? Peace and, you know, revolution, and I'm a communist, I'm a socialist, and I'm only worth 500 million. But you know, poor old Andy, you're worth 100, Andy. You don't need.
Yeah, he don't. Yeah, that's true.
Need it. I mean, he's not going to starve either. But fairness, what's fair? There's just bullshit. You know, to me, I just go fair, be fair. And we made
that's
that.
Right. That's right. I agree.
The album, you know, to Zero to Infinity, that album, which I love it, and we did that. We just said each one. I just said, okay, he wrote, you know, this one's four-way split, 25%, you know, or 20% to 5 people. We worked it out. Who had something to do? Who had a piece? And we made sure Chris got at least 10% on every track.
Okay, that makes sense.
You can do that. You know, it's not hard. You just register it, and it's a form. I've done it, you know, dozens of times. It's not a problem. But it happened, you know, Echo Beach, I mean, the Master and the Muffins, that they said, oh yeah, we've agreed, you know, that rehearsal, sitting in the room, working out the material. And they're going, yeah, no, we're all going to share this. Everyone, even split, you know, we all wrote this, all the materials. You know. And
that's the way to do it.
Guess what? Mark came 100%. No.
Bullshit. No.
They said it and they did, and he didn't. He just, you know, full of shit.
Oh, that's terrible.
That's terrible. I tell you.
Oh, the music. Jeez. Dealing with musicians and artists are not easy. You know, some of them are really difficult to work with. They're just, some of them are difficult, but you were able to produce all these. They must have really believed in your production abilities to do all those records.
I think because, well, look, I did think about it a lot, and it is in my PhD thesis dissertation, if you you can get from University of South Wales. It's out there. But no, I thought about that because it's about how do you assert authority.
Mm,
When you're
that's it.
meeting a bunch of people, they may know Gong, but they don't know that a lot of them never heard of Gong. It doesn't mean anything. And until you've had a few hits as well, so in the early days,
That's
especially,
true.
and so what gives them any reason to trust you with their precious music? And I did think about this a lot, and I thought, well, the thing is that one thing is that I speak music. I can when I talk to a musician, they know that I'm a good musician. I played at the highest level. I can play fancy,
That's
11,
true.
in fact,
Yeah.
you know, seven mates and the rest of it. And I know how sort of stuff goes together. And I speak music. And so they know that I'm speaking their language. When I tell them something, I say, it felt a bit rushed, or, I like it, but, it's a bit sort of, rigid, and I think you can push it here, or, I know what I'm talking about. I speak music, I'm a musician, and
Right, right. Yeah,
so
you are. And that helps.
they know, and so it's very important. And it's not like, some guy going, oh, I think we could market this with, purple t-shirts and some semi-naked girls dancing on the video. It'd be lovely.
Yeah, that's true.
That's not
Well,
what they're going to hear at that point.
well, I think we've run out of time here today, but
Well, fun. I'm always happy to talk about myself. I'm a fascinating subject. I look, there's not much more to say, is there? I probably missed out.
that's okay. I mean,
Things.
this is great.
Uh,
Thank you for your time. I mean, these are such great stories. I mean, you've had a fabulous career. You're a doctor too. I didn't
yeah,
mention that. Dr. Mike Howlett. How you
Doctor
like
Mike.
that? That
Yes,
really rings well.
you got a sick riff, I can help.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, it's been a real pleasure meeting you, Mike, and thank you for doing this. You've added to this series. I mean, a lot of people don't even know how much work you've done,
No, I
production wise
know.
too.
Well, yes, the music, yeah, and the academia. I've written a few chapters in books as well about
Are
this
you- are
stuff.
you- are you going to be doing any new music coming up?
Well, I'm having I'm very sad because I had met a wonderful guitarist called Steve Higgins. And in fact, John Leckie, the producer, he produced Radiohead, and
Oh yeah, I know
he's
him.
done some very good stuff, John. He's a very, very lovely guy and a very good friend. And I had a party in the studio, not this one, it's my old house, and it burnt down. And I rebuilt it, and then I had a shed resurrection party, and John came and he said, "Can I bring this friend of mine? He's a guitarist," and he brings along this guy Steve, and we meet in the shed and we jam and we get off pretty well. And he calls me a few days later and says, "Look, I've got this gig, and I'm going to come and work up some material. I've got a nice drummer too, who's
Mm.
it'd be good." But yeah, so let's do it. So we go and we rehearse. We're looking at material, thinking, oh, we could do this, or maybe do some Hendrix or whatever. You can play all sorts of stuff, and we're trying to work out material. And we sort of jamming as we're doing it. We have a nice jam, and some really good jams. And I said, well, look, why don't we just jam it? It's just a party. It was actually a party. You guys, 50th in the backyard. And he was going to pay us, a couple £100 each. It was going to be good. And and they said, yeah, whatever. And turns out he himself had been in hippie festival bands,
Oh, I see.
gigs without jam, material, and was very happy to jam it. And so we started doing these gigs. That gig got recorded on. He was a nut about recording too. He's just set up, 2 or 3 microphones and record straight into my laptop, and and like 4 or 5 tracks, but they were all mostly instrumental, but they were great. They just grew like fuck. And he was that kind of guitarist. He could do Hendrix, he could do funky groove stuff, And we had a thing where just like would shift and change, and made it interesting, and it had dynamic. And we did about maybe 30 gigs in all, including a Glastonbury, a couple
Mm.
of in the smaller stages, not the big stage, but in the green field where the real true Glastonbury.
Oh,
Uh,
wow, that's great.
but lots of little festivals over the things, and we're still going until I moved to Australia. And then we were going to actually came back and did another gig after a couple of years in. That was fun as well, but never any material. We just could jam it. And then we were going to come back in 2014 after 5 years, and about a month before, I get this call, and he died. He'd had bowel cancer.
Oh my
And
gosh, that is a horrible story. Oh,
I had he was going to be in badly because I'd seen him, several times.
oh.
He'd had it for 5 or 6 years, and so what are you doing for it? And he said, well, I'm taking this fantastic herbal treatment, man. It's just going to be beautiful. And then I'm trying this thing, with the crystals, and you're
Oh
going,
boy.
have some fucking radiation and chemo, mate.
Yeah, right.
Cut it out. I mean, I've got friends, and I've got friends who are dead and friends who are alive, and the ones who are dead tried and the ones who are alive took the poison.
Boy.
Please don't do it. But
Yeah.
no, you cannot say it. I mean, seriously, a couple of people didn't make it with the powerful chemo. Some good friends, but with that. But he was just doing it completely.
And how old was he? How old was he when he died?
About 55, I think.
Oh boy.
56.
That's a shame.
He was such a great. And I tried to find. I mean, I got the most lovely drummer, a guy called Steve Cassidy, who's a very groovy front man. We've done a ton of gigs. I've done a bunch of gigs trying to use different guys, but to get somebody who's not afraid to stand up and do a 2-hour set with no material, that's it's scary if you don't know how to.
Yeah. Well, now that you have your PhD, I mean, you could write a great book about your whole life. Have you thought about that?
I started writing sections. There are nice little stories of, sitting on the Titanic, with me and this American guy sailing to it from Australia, and sitting. We used to sneak out to the very front of this ship, it was a passenger ship, and we sit right on that point, and you can dangle your feet over the edge at midnight, the moon on the thing in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, smoking this Nepalese hash that he brought,
That's something.
doing the hippie trail, and ended up in Australia. And Jack, his name was. I wish I could find Jack. I was 20 years old. That was so cool. I just love that little story because of that. And look, I had a good run, and it's been very unusual and interesting.
It has. I mean, to play with David Allen and that whole Gong group, I mean, that must have been fascinating to be in that whole scene there with David and all those hippies, and man.
That was a good time.
Yeah.
Unusual. But I was the perfect guy. We know that. I was the tourist, right?
Yeah, nobody like David. I mean, I saw him a couple times. I saw him with you in New York, and I saw him solo, Poet for Sale, and that whole era there.
David was a very interesting guy. I mean, there were things that annoyed me, but we stayed friends. I used to see him. He ended up living in Byron Bay in New South Wales in Australia. He went back and lived there.
Oh, okay.
And that's like a 2-hour drive south from Brisbane. So I would just go down, and with my wife would go and stay with him in his rented house there. And he sometimes came and did poetry gigs in Brisbane, because again, it's like the nearest big city. Yeah, no, I mean, David and Jenny lived there too. She ended up moving there.
Oh, she did? Okay.
They lived, a couple of miles away from each other. And so I managed to end up being quite close again, even though I was the group capitalist, or fascist, as David liked to call me.
Oh boy. Well, you've left a lot of music, so there's nothing to complain. You've left amazing amount of music, and I don't think a lot of people know about all your production work with all these bands from the early 80s and Gong and
but see, some people know all about that and don't know about Gong. So
that's it.
There's a different world, and
Yeah,
yeah,
totally,
so
totally
who
different
knows?
world.
Gone who?
That's it. Well, Mike, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for coming on, and I'll let you know when this broadcasts. And thank
Yeah,
you
I
for
mean,
being
is
part of
the
this.
first one up yet? Is that there, or is it the first one we did? Is that up yet? My
No,
daughter.
it'll be up soon. I'll have that up, and then I'll wait a
Okay,
little bit, and
she
then
said send her a link and she'll put it on her Instagram, and she has followers too.
okay, I'll
Good.
send it your way. I'll send the link your way, and hopefully we can keep in touch.
Okay.
Okay, that's a pleasure. Have a great day there. Take care, Mike.